You start.
Okay. You can start your question. You are senior.
Okay, I'll start. Yeah. Okay. Firstly, I'll say congratulations to DAPENG for the show in the Western Sydney University. I think for the artist, I think they have the 3 layers. That means first layer, if you have the solo show in the state gallery and national gallery, like Cao Yin's and gallery, that's very important. I think second layer is like university, the galleries, because it's very academic. And the third level is just like a commercial gallery or something. Because commercial gallery also very important. They can make money for living. And these 3 is very important. But I think university is very important too. This can make you the academic labels. And I very focus on the university exhibitions. Before I did a lot of the university, like the Formosa Gallery in Tasmania, and which also Queensland, some university, and here out Sydney in some universities. But anyway, DAPENG is very good for in the Western Sydney's. Okay. Yeah, also I think we has different, because I'm the old generation, already been here for 33 years, too long. My whole life in Australia now, and because of migration to Australia when I was 32, I think. Yeah, now I'm 65. And but DAPENG, very young, maybe
28.
40. I think I'm the older generation, like fathers, the same fathers, DAPENG's generation. He like it.
Exactly.
Yeah, he like my daughter's age or something, and I think also different generation have different thinking, different ways, and anyway, today I'll make some questions for DAPENG, and are very interesting. And I think the DAPENG's generation is much lucky like us, because English very good. And also he's learning for the theory and histories. And when I look in DAPENG, gave me the question, wow, it's quite a lot. My question was just simple, very little. I think I know he's John Clark's student. Anyway, first ask DAPENG's first questions. From I have learned about you have studied art, history, and theory. What made you change over to the actual fine art? Did those knowledge have any impact on your paintings? This is my first question.
Yes, absolutely. I think for myself, it's not a direct change, but probably career-wise, it is. Because like Professor Han and Joanna, they all mentioned that I started to draw and paint from a very young age back in China. And I remember went to the Saturday classes when I was even before primary school age, go to those drawing classes. I don't know, probably Dr. Guan will know the Guangming Primary School in Beijing. And that was where I first went into my father would consider that's a formal training. And then later on, through my entire early education period, I would always it was not just Saturday. I would go on Wednesday, Thursday, just a few times a week. After school, I would go on the bus and to go to the training places, and to draw and to learn how to paint. I think for my generation back then, it's quite lucky because I think it's a much competitive world now, and I have two daughters, and they have to do a lot of things. I try to reduce the things they have to do, but thinking of what I experienced before, I think it's just quite a different world. So Dr. Guan, you mentioned we are luckier at the moment. Yes, indeed luckier, but because we have access to knowledge and information much easier. But also I think that could be a double-sided sword, that when the influx of information is too rapid and too much, and I think for people, without the ability to process those information rather than just accepting information is not easy. But coming back to talk to myself, so I've been painting and drawing is always a part of my life. But when I was turned to teenage years, I think my parents was planning for me to went with the routine path for art enthusiastic young kid. That I will go to the high school of Kofa, the College of Fine Art in Beijing, and then do fine art in Kofa as well in Beijing. That's what we saw other kids doing art. That's a normal path. Probably I've been up to that age. I've been doing drawing and painting for too long. Every day, like I'll do 20 or 30 drawings, live drawings. I'll do that at home. Go on the street. Go to the park. Draw Peking opera or the people, the older generation practice, and I'll do a lot of that. And at the age of teenage years, there's this sort of attitude of rebel. So I chose not to do that. And in my bachelor, I chose to do visual communication, which is not too far away from art, because I also did art. There's a section of art history in the 3-year course, and also practical drawings. But visual communication, when I did that in the early 2000s, was already a lot heavily influenced by technology, and that means I have to learn a lot of computer technologies, like learning how to doing the software and the editing, and how does that work in the commercial world. So then I actually worked as a designer, commercial designer, for several years, both part-time and while I was still doing my course, the bachelor course. So after I got experience of as a commercial designer, I felt like being a designer is probably not 100% what I truly want to do, because I don't get to control the whole project. Yeah, of course, for my age I can't. And I feel like there's not enough room for the total express of my ideas. And so then after my bachelor, because reading was always one of my, apart from drawing, is one of my major part of interest, especially. So I read different spectrum of books, history or fiction, different types. And probably that's the background, that's the foundation stone of my interest in art history. So like Joanna has mentioned that, so I discovered a lot of scholars. So I realized that at a certain point, I realized that a lot of scholars studying Chinese art, they're not Chinese. So that's an important point in my life, and that's probably a stimulation for me to finally apply to do art history in the University of Sydney, which I spent 5 years. And so I spent 2 years working on pre-modern Buddhist art in China, and then another 3 years in my PhD period that I focus on the early 20th century modernization of art in China. Yes, and so within those 5 years of study, and of course it heavily impacted what I later do in my art, especially my passion in traditional Chinese landscape painting grew so much. And this one thing I want to mention is, as a young kid, I never really appreciate the very dark toned scroll paintings. They just don't look attractive. I'm more interested in Western art because they are colorful and they're figurative. I know what I'm looking at, and I know what sort of story they're trying to tell. But for Chinese painting, and I can't read the calligraphy, I can't read the seal carvings, and everything looks so dark, so dense. Yeah, and there's another point to that. You know, in Palace Museum, yeah, they were setting it up in the old way. It's just you don't get to look at them closely, and it's so dark in the exhibition hall. Yeah, I felt this distance, but until I'm in the art history study, I started to realize how much I love the landscape paintings, and until my as a young adult age, I started to travel around, including seeing real scroll paintings with a very close distance, for example, in the Art Gallery of New South Wales, or when my wife and I had the honeymoon in Europe. So our target is to, so I did a lot of research on what sort of paintings I need to look at in different museums. So all of those experiences had a great impact to what I'm doing now. Yeah.
Very good. Before I think, yeah, DAPENG is very quiet, not like speed. Quite long speed. Yeah, that's interesting. And sometimes you look very Vietnam or something. But when you give a chance to talk, wow, can't stop.
Yeah.
And that's
Beijing.
it's very interesting. That's the first time I know DAPENG can be. Yeah, and also interesting, you know, for the. I think probably when you're learning for the theory and history, I guess maybe it's boring, you know, not like painting is more interesting and colorful line something. And also important that if you can make a more big reputation, like article price, many the shadings, and also you can make money too. I think this is for the important reason, but DAPENG even maybe not mentioned this. Yeah, but anyway, this is just I'm joking. Second question, not talking too long. If I have the chance to talk. And I'm joking. Yeah. Second question is, how do you experience and feel about Australians as countries, including its culture, history, political, and society? How they've been reflected in your artistic creations? Yeah, this is my second question.
That's a big
question. How can
question.
Australians also
On the election day.
Not many Australians.
I think it's quite obvious for anyone who has seen my works that landscape is my main theme in my art. So it means the Australian landscape gave me the most direct influence in my art.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and like the faunas, I mean the plants, the coastlines, the different sorts of landscape, and that's also one part I enjoy living in Australia, because although Sydney is a big city turning into a mega city, but we still get to enjoy the nature, like within very short driving distance, different types of nature. So that's something I enjoy a lot, and I do sketches of like sometimes I'll stop on the side of the street because I saw a eucalyptus tree with a very interesting shape, and then I'll just sketch that tree. Yeah, the landscape is a very big impact in my art, and as for my life, I think Australians' inclusiveness is acting a very important role, and which is, I think, something different to what I experienced in China or probably Eastern Asian countries in general. But I think the freedom and inclusiveness in Australia is a no better place for artists to express freely. And I also more and more realizing this because I can see what my kids are doing here, because they growing they were born and growing up in Australia, which is a totally different experience than of what I had in the 1980s and 90s back in China. So with those sort of comparison that make me understand more of that. So yeah, that's my answer. This, the landscape and the inclusiveness.
Yeah, this is a very good answer. Although
Yeah.
time is very suitable. And I think yeah, Australian landscape very important. Yeah, also influenced me. I remember 1978. I saw the first Australian exhibition in Beijing, run by Leon and Bernice, called Australian Landscape. This is my first time looking at Australian works. Oh, beautiful and something. Yeah, it's very early. So,
National Museum.
Yeah, in National Museum. Yeah, also the catalog is the Sydney Nolan's big and next or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, the third question. Okay, I'm going to read. Yeah, you're living in Australia. Does your identity as a Chinese and cause any concern? Did you express that concern in your artworks for your identification, Chinese in Australia? Yeah, that's my third question.
I think regarding my understanding of my identity for myself, I think I don't really have anxiety of that. And I had more anxiety before I had a certain career path, especially when I was doing my PhD, and then in 2014, after I painted in Cao Lao Shi, and there was some opportunity came up for me. So at that time I was at a crossroad. So I think I felt more anxiety about how to make decisions in life, yeah, rather than identity. And again, I think because of the inclusiveness in Australian society, and I don't feel anxious in any way regarding my Chinese background or culture, and especially because I was doing academic studies and also art. I actually felt like it is in advantage in many ways, because I have a friend that he has a son. That boy is now year 12, doing his year 12, and one day we were just chatting, and he said, all of my classmates, they have a second language from their family, and I can only speak English. And you know, from that sense, you almost feel like if you're coming from another cultural background, is in Australia, in this multicultural society, is rather a advantage than a sort of an anxiety. Yeah. Sorry. And so that's why I don't quite express it that way in my artworks. But my artworks do reflect my personal understandings, that it's all personal, especially in my earlier works that I include different elements, which is, I found similarities in Guan Lao Shi's work as well, like the little figures, and the knowledge we withdraw from either the West or the Chinese culture. Yeah, that's just my personal expression.
Yeah, I think for the audience to recognize DAPENG's work, yeah, they look quite Chinese. Using many Chinese landscape, the shadows, the yin yang or some things. Yeah, the Fan Guan's work behind Cao Yin's. And anyway, Joanna also has a shadow and the landscape. But I think it is very good idea. They did very naturally, very good. Last questions. And in your works, you have in your works is very modern. You know, like something in here, and also some of the works is very traditional. You know, use like some things. How you keep your balance, you know, for the contemporary and the Chinese, how you can be used this element for your works. This is my fourth. Last questions.
Okay, so as we can see in this exhibition, the more abstract works are my later works. So the more traditionally styled landscapes, what I did from the very beginning of it. And I got to ask by a lot of people recently that what makes me to make such abrupt change. But I think for myself, there is a continuity in it. It's not really abrupt for myself, because I I'm the best person at understanding the evolution of my own ideas. But the reason why I'm changing towards what I'm doing now is probably an important part is my reading into the Western philosophy, because I think the history of philosophy and the history of science has a lot to do with the modernization of art in the West in general. From Paul Cézanne, why he started to paint that way, probably that was at the point and the development in the science enabled people to realize that what we see and what we hear, what we sense might not be a reflection of the real world. So I think I pick up the points that really interests me from my readings, and which is the foundation of my ideas. So when I'm trying to break through and explore new styles in my works, I try to do it from deep inside rather than keep going superficially on the styles. So I suffered a lot from a few years of exploration with a lot of failed attempts. And also did a lot of thinkings in those explorations. There was some questions I always asked myself: what do I really like in Chinese landscape? I think my answers to that later on, I found out, is the perspective and the composition. So that's something I always use, because the composition and perspective enables illusion that has the ability to communicate through different dimensions, which I think is the beauty in Chinese landscape. Because Chinese landscape, you can't really tell exactly what time of the day it is, what time of the year it is. Yeah, some of the painting represents the seasons, but there's this flowing of time in Chinese landscape, because it doesn't have a fixed focus point. So that's one of my main interests. And then why do I adopt colors and geometrical shapes is probably because the great artists in history, both in China and the West. For example, Mondrian, he was painting trees and natural landscapes, but he developed his style into the colorful squares and shapes and lines, but that came from the natural shapes. So all of those gave me a lot of inspirations of how do I do my own things. So I'm influenced by the hard edge geometrical abstracts and color field paintings. But I just the difference between my work and those works is I don't want to give up three-dimensional representation. I want to keep my landscape in those abstracts, so it's not totally non-representational abstract. So I want to keep the landscape, and I want to find a balance between the representational shapes and the abstract. I think in my works, the abstract shapes represents the man-made world, that's how we understand the world from ancient Greek time. And then I still want to keep my passion, which is the natural landscape. Yeah, that's my answer.
Very good. I think you can say Dapeng is their really history background started. Now you can say these were important, not like us, only you can just looking, not talking for us. But Dapeng talk very good. Okay, your turn now.
Okay.
Can you leave it to 2 questions?
Okay. The first one and the last one, maybe. Yeah, I go. Okay. Yes, I go. Yeah, so I'm very happy to have Dr. Guan to have a dialogue with me today. It's not only because Dr. Guan is a role model, for all the Chinese artists, including other younger artists working and living in Australia, and also because we're both from Beijing, and like Dr. Guan has mentioned that he's really my father's generation, which is true, because my father was born in the mid 50s. Yeah, 50s. So although I didn't experience those years, but I heard stories, I saw family photos, all that, and so it's a great honor, you know. And but you know, growing up in Beijing for you must be a totally different experience to myself. I'm interested to know what were the main forms of art that influenced you as a child, and what was your earliest contact with Western art?
Okay, yeah, our generation is very different because we grew up just during the Chinese cultural revolutions. And we just play on the street like a wild child, you know, not study at home, you know. And but you know the parents, you know, some clever parents just like children to learn some paintings, musicians or something. And yeah, my father worried if you just you know play on the street for the future is more difficult, can be got a job or something. And yeah, my father put me to learning painting, and also I'm interested in Japan. And anyway, and but for the main street, the main influence to China during that time is Russian style. You know, Russian style, realistic style and the romantic style. Yeah, we make a very long time for the portrait and just very realistic. And also university just learn this the same things. You know, it's very boring, not very interesting. And take 1 week just make one portrait, you know, some things and technical eyes. Yeah, but we did these things, and that's why we can to make a very realistic styles like portrait paintings. But for the young children, for the arts, and I think just like Chinese reopened the door is in 1978. Many Western culture come to through to the China because Beijing is very lucky. Beijing is like capital city. Many Western things first through to the Beijing. I remember I just mentioned like 1970s Australian landscape and I think first French show for the Impressionism, like Monet and Manet's work came to the Zhongshan Gongyuan, just very little the exhibition. We're looking, wow, so fresh and shining, and before we all look like you know, Lenin and Marx and something this one, but looking this, oh, totally different. Wow, we really like it. But later on, like later like Cubism, and but just in 10 years, all the Western history things all came through to China. We just very anxiously to studies and followed them, and yeah, and I think for after 10 years we realized, oh, we should make yourself painting, not just follow the art. And I'm lucky I found my styles, yeah, my own. I'm very lucky, very early to find my self-language styles, and also lucky I meet like Geometrical professor from Tasmania, David Williams, and B.T. Church. They visited to China in 1988. They look at our exhibitions. Also, the Geometrical arts came to Australia. But I'm learning something in China, but I express my work in Australia. Yeah, this is my history.
Yeah, it's quite different. Of course, I remembering when I was young, I got chances to see pictures of Impressionism and different things. They didn't just came suddenly.
Yeah, this is
I'll go with the last question.
Okay.
Yeah. So nowadays, the definition of art and how art can be created is expanding so fast that the whole phenomenon has never been seen before. I sometimes feel that the amount of information that we receive every day, passively or actively, is just overwhelming. It is true that artists get inspirations from looking at other people's art, but I think it could also be the opposite. One could get lost and confused if seen too much. So a question for Dr. Guan is, you know, as a role model for the younger generation artists, including myself, I'd like to hear your view on how to find inspiration and how to make breakthrough and find new directions in art making.
Yes, when you're looking back for my histories, and yeah, I quite followed for the fashionables, you know, what happened in the world, also including political things and history things, and theory things. And for example, you know, recently for the multiverse is very popular. And for my new works, just talking about digital multiverse things. Next month you can saw my show in Mountain Bronx. It's quite different, very different. And yeah, I like challenges and change quite a lot. When you look at my early work, you know, firstly, when I arrived to Australia, I focused for the two culture, how the different Western and Eastern cultures. You can look at my work, they use both cultures to mix and some things like I did, like a Testible Baby series, and the Living Spaceman series, the Great Wall of Eggplants, and they all talking about how the two cultures clash and mix and some things. And later on, interesting about the environmental things, because Australian environmental is very good, and like a model for the global. Welcome back to China, the comparison, the two cultures. Wow, the pollution in China so serious, but Australia, the eyes, the blue sky or something. Yeah, I did many of our works, including installation or something for the environmental things. And later, I'm quite interested about Australian migration and refugees things, because I stay my studio every day. I'm working here, just like another refugee boat came to Australians, you know, the boundary for the soldiers, just you know, to looking after some things. And yeah, I think around 2000, I did a lot about refugee and migration, the works. I did the big one in MC, the big the murals, and also some other series works like Boatman or some things. And I quite followed this the idea or something. And later on, for the Australian histories, I did a big imagination show for another history, 2006 in the Powerhouse Museum, talking about Zheng He discovered Australians, not Captain Cook. You know, it's Zheng He, just 340 years earlier than Cook, Captain Cook's. And yeah, quite jump a lot. Sometimes just looking some forms, giving ideas to like inspiration. Sometimes like you reading. I quite like reading. Yeah, maybe later, yeah, even probably we can talking about how I can reading what book you're interested in. Maybe we can change. Anyway, and yeah, sometimes you know I can use what happened just in the world. Quickly, you know, can be in my pattern. You know, like multiversal before, like the God War, you know, in 1902 or something. Yeah, later I did the Great War of Angela or something. Yeah, maybe different artists, different. Yeah, some artists just interesting for the portrait or for the landscape. Doesn't matter. But this is my experience. Okay,
Thank you for that.